You know that feeling you get when you're standing at the absolute edge of a dark woods?
Oh, yeah. Creepy.
Right. Or like maybe you're driving late at night and you cross the boundary line, leaving your familiar town, and suddenly the streetlights they just end.
You're just staring out into the dark.
Exactly, staring into the void. And there is this universal human feeling, this sort of creeping instinctual anxiety that we all get in what anthropologists call liminal spaces.
Right, the in-between spaces.
Yeah. Crossroads, borders, the very edges of the map.
Well, it's that visceral sense of the unknown, you know?
Yeah.
Whenever you enter a liminal space, you are physically stepping out of the ordered, predictable world that you actually control.
Mm-hmm.
And you're stepping into the chaotic world that you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, historically for our ancestors, that chaos wasn't just spooky. It meant literal disease or unseen predators or hostile enemy tribes.
Which brings us to today's deep dive, because we are looking at an absolutely fascinating stack of sources today.
We really are.
We're talking evolutionary biology papers, historical anthropology, cross-cultural religious studies, and all of them are aimed at answering one fundamental question.
Right. How have human beings across all of time and geography defended themselves against that terrifying fear of the unknown?
Exactly. And the mission for our conversation today is to explore the universal and honestly the incredibly surprising weapon that ancient and even modern humans have used to guard these boundaries.
It is definitely surprising.
Because, as these sources reveal, the ultimate cross-cultural shield against the void of death is, well, it's the phallus.
Yep. That's right, the male reproductive organ.
Yeah.
And I completely understand how jarring that sounds to modern ears, right? If we want to understand human psychology, we have to kind of look past our current cultural sensibilities.
Sure.
We have to recognize the sheer psychological power this symbol held for literally thousands of years.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, to a modern listener, this just sounds like ancient people being, crude.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm looking at these biology papers in our sources, and I'm honestly a bit confused. Why would human architecture or boundary defense have anything to do with primate behavior? Are you saying there are profound biological mechanisms at play here?
Absolutely, yeah. To really understand why humans began carving these specific symbols at the borders of their towns, we have to go back, way back.
Like pre-human culture?
Long before human culture even
Yeah.
existed. We have to look straight into our evolutionary neurobiology.
Mm-hmm.
Because we share, about 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees.
Right.
And when you observe how wild chimpanzees defend their territory from rival groups, you see the exact blueprint for human boundary defense.
I see the notes here mentioning a threat display, but what does that actually look like out in the wild?
Oh, it is highly choreographed, intense aggression. When adult male chimpanzees patrol their borders and sense a threat, they don't just hide.
They'll run away.
No, they stand completely upright in this, bipedal swagger.
Mm-hmm.
And they experience something called piloerection.
Piloerection.
Yeah, which is a biological response where every hair on their body stands on end.
Oh, to make them look bigger, like a cat.
Exactly, to make them look physically massive. They throw rocks, they beat the ground, and they unleash these terrifying panhoot screams to completely overwhelm the rival group.
It's just maximum intimidation.
Pure intimidation.
But the research also brings in squirrel monkeys, and it explicitly states this behavior is not about mating. Can you, explain that?
Precisely. This is a crucial distinction here.
Yeah.
Among squirrel monkeys, engaging in genital displays is a purely social mechanism.
Okay.
It's used entirely to establish dominance, hierarchy, and spatial control. It's a physiological response driven entirely by neurotransmitters.
Wait, so it's a chemical thing?
Yeah, researchers have mapped this out. They found that the alpha males who initiate these aggressive boundary displays have highly elevated levels of whole blood serotonin and testosterone.
Wow.
It is literally a chemical mechanism of spatial defense.
So it's basically a biological weapon.
Pretty much.
And it gets even more strategic with putty-nosed monkeys in the Congo, because the sources say the females actually use specific alarm calls to recruit the males as, hired guns?
Yes, that's one of the most fascinating behavioral adaptations we see. When a lethal predator, like a leopard, crosses the boundary into their territory,
Right.
the females issue a very specific call. And this call forces the males to the front lines.
Like drafting them into the military.
Exactly. The males then have to emit a responding pyow call to confirm they're engaging the threat. The group is literally using male aggression as a biological shield at the border of their territory.
Which brings us to the core aha moment of this whole biological puzzle. Because how does a monkey screaming at a leopard translate into human beings carving stones?
Right, the jump to humans.
Yeah. The sources highlight a theory by evolutionary anthropologist Tosca Snydalor.
Right, so Snydlar suggests we need to look at the human sympathetic nervous system. When early human ancestors faced extreme, lethal threats, like a predator charging them in the dark, they experienced a massive adrenaline overload.
Just pure panic.
Pure fight or flight.
What?
And that response was so biologically intense that it frequently triggered a non-sexual erection.
Wait, really? Just purely from fear and adrenaline?
Yes, it's an involuntary physiological response to extreme stress. So as human cognition evolved, ancient humans started to connect this involuntary biological reaction, this
Oh.
physical state that happens right the very moment you are fighting for your life.
Hmm.
They connected it with power, defense, and defying death.
They took that raw biological reaction and materialized it into art.
Exactly.
And we actually have archaeological proof of this, don't we?
We do, from the Upper Paleolithic period.
Wow.
Yeah, in the Hohlfels Cave in Germany, archaeologists uncovered a siltstone phallus that is 28,000 years old.
That is incredibly old.
Tens of thousands of years before the invention of written language, early humans were carving these objects to cope with the terror of the unknown.
So it's less about reproduction and more like a biological beware of dog sign built directly into our nervous system.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is that this isn't just abstract art. This is pure, primitive survival instinct materialized into stone.
Yeah.
It's the physical, permanent embodiment of the statement. I am strong, I am live, and I will vigorously defend this space.
But how does a biological survival instinct become like actual city infrastructure? Because once human beings recognized this psychological power, they didn't just leave it in caves.
Right, they brought it into the light.
Yeah, if we look at the ancient Mediterranean, they turned this into a formalized, state-sponsored defense system against invisible threats.
Greece and Rome are perfect examples of this evolution. Imagine you were walking through ancient Greece.
Okay, I'm there.
If you walked out to a dangerous crossroad, or the very edge of a city-state, you would run into a Hermae stone.
I'm looking at the description of these in the sources. They're square pillars topped with the head of the god Hermes. But I always just thought of Hermes as the messenger god with the winged shoes. Why is he at the border?
Well, he was a messenger, but fundamentally in Greek theology, Hermes was the absolute god of boundaries, roads, and travelers.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, and the Hermes stones reflected that specific power. Beneath the carved head of Hermes, right in the center of the pillar, was an erect phallus.
Right there in public.
Right there. The Greeks placed these exactly at the borders because they deeply believed that liminal spaces, crossroads, the wilderness, were where evil spirits and thieves naturally gathered.
And then we have the Romans, who seemed to take this concept and scale it up to a whole new level of national paranoia.
Oh, the Romans were incredibly superstitious.
The sources talk extensively about something called the fascinus, and it was all to fight something called the evil eye. Can you unpack how the evil eye actually worked in their minds?
Sure. The evil eye, or invidia in Latin, was the destructive power of jealousy. Put yourself in the shoes of an ancient Roman. They didn't just think jealousy was a bad emotion.
Like just someone being petty.
No, much worse.
Yeah.
They believed that if someone looked at you with deep, resentful envy, that gaze carried a literal physical magic.
Wow.
Almost like a radioactive beam
Mm.
that could cause your children to get sick, rot your crops, or bring terrible physical disaster.
It's basically an invisible laser of bad luck.
Exactly. And the philosopher Pliny the Elder explicitly called the fascinus the medicus invidiae.
Meaning the doctor.
Yes, meaning the doctor or the medical antidote for that jealousy.
And they took this invisible threat so seriously that it became a matter of national security. The sources say the Vestal Virgins, the highest-ranking priestesses in all of Rome,
Very important figures.
were legally tasked with guarding a sacred, state-owned fascinus to protect the entire Roman Empire from disaster.
It's wild to think about. And we see it in their military, too.
Yeah.
When a victorious Roman general had a massive chariot parade through the city.
Right, the big ticker tape parade.
Yeah, they would hang this symbol right under his chariot. Think about the psychology there. A general is parading through the streets, receiving the deafening roar and adoration of thousands of people.
Okay.
In the Roman mind, that is the exact moment he is most vulnerable to the jealousy of the crowd and the envy of the gods.
Oh, because everyone is looking at him.
Right. So the fascinus hanging under the chariot was there to absorb and shatter that negative energy before it could strike him.
Okay, I can understand a general in a war chariot, but the sources detail how they use this on a micro level, too. For babies,
Yes, for protection.
Roman parents would put these wind chimes, called tintinnabula, around a baby's crib or their neck. And looking at the descriptions, these were bizarre.
They're quite elaborate.
Phallic wind chimes, sometimes with bird wings or the back legs of a beast, often featuring a rude hand gesture called the manolfica.
The fake hand, yeah.
Plus, they worshipped the god Priapus, who violently guarded farm borders. Have to push back here.
Go ahead.
Wait a minute. They were hanging these over baby cribs. Didn't anyone in Rome find this highly inappropriate?
It's a completely natural question from our modern perspective, for sure. But we really have to step into their worldview.
Okay.
To the ancient Romans, this wasn't erotica. It wasn't about sex at all. They lived in a brutal world where childhood mortality was incredibly high.
Right. A fever could just take a child overnight.
Exactly. Disaster could strike at any moment. Disease, bad luck, the evil eye. These were all manifestations of death and decay.
So it's a battle of opposing forces.
Precisely. To fight the ultimate symbol of death, you have to use the ultimate symbol of life and birth.
It's not sex, it's life.
Yes. It's a concept anthropologists call apotropaic magic. That's magic specifically designed to avert or turn away evil.
Okay, that makes sense.
The tintinnabula, with their chiming sounds and shocking, grotesque visual imagery, were meant to startle and distract the evil spirits,
Oh, to pull their attention away.
drawing their dangerous gaze away from the fragile life of the child.
That makes perfect sense when you frame it as pure life pushing back against pure death. But what happens when a society isn't constantly fighting for bare survival?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, as cultures around the world grew more sophisticated and peaceful, how did this aggressive symbol evolve?
Well, it adapts beautifully. Societies don't just abandon the primitive defense mechanism, they civilize it.
They refine it.
Exactly. They soften the symbol to fit into much more complex, harmonious religious frameworks. Japan is a wonderful example of this evolution.
Let's talk about Japan.
In Japanese Shinto and folk religion, you have the Dosojin. These are boundary deities placed at the edges of villages or mountain passes, specifically to block plagues and malevolent spirits from entering.
And the sources show that initially these were just straight-up male stones called Sinokami, which translates to blocking or obstructing.
Right, very literal.
But during the peaceful Edo period, the imagery radically changes.
It does. As Japanese society became more settled and focused on community harmony rather than constant warfare, the artisan guild started carving what we call double-bodied Dosojin.
Oh, I love this part.
Instead of an aggressive single stone, you'd walk to the edge of a village and see a beautiful carving of a male and female couple sitting together, holding hands or hugging.
So the focus completely shifted from a violent threat display to harmonious fertility and community protection.
A total shift in tone, yes.
So I have to mention a hilarious side note from the sources.
Oh, the Sphinx!
Yes. In 2012, in Nagano, Japan, a landowner was incredibly frustrated because people kept illegally dumping trash on his property.
Right.
So he just set up a plastic sphinx.
A literal plastic sphinx.
And the illegal dumping stopped instantly. The locals jokingly called it a modern Dosojin.
Which perfectly proves the underlying psychological principle.
It does.
If you place a sudden, sacred, or just undeniably strange marker at a boundary, it still makes human beings hesitate and subconsciously check their behavior.
But what if you don't want to just block a spirit? What if you want to actively trick it?
Ah, the decoy strategy.
Yeah, the sources outline a fascinating amulet from Thailand called the paladkik, and the literal translation is honorable surrogate. How does this decoy system work?
It is deeply rooted in animism. Animism is the belief that objects, places, and creatures all possess a distinct spiritual essence.
So spirits are everywhere.
The world is crowded with invisible spirits. The paladkik is usually a wooden or metal amulet. Historically, Buddhist monks would legitimize these by carving sacred Pali incantations, ancient Buddhist texts, directly into them.
Okay, so it's a holy object.
Right, but the mechanism of how it works is all about how it's worn. Men wear it under their clothing, but intentionally off-center from the midline of their body.
Because the logic is, if a malicious spirit tries to attack the man's core life force, this amulet acts as a magical decoy. It takes the hit instead of the person. But wait, if a monk blesses this with sacred text, wouldn't taking it into an unsavory place be highly offensive to the spirits? The notes say they bring these into casinos and brothels.
That's the genius of the adaptation, really, because it's technically a piece of secular folk magic, an honorable surrogate. It isn't bound by the incredibly strict purity rules of formal temple amulets.
Oh, see.
You can take it into spaces that are socially liminal and potentially dangerous, like bars or gambling halls. Merchants even keep large ones right by their cash registers to draw in wealth.
That is so practical.
It's a completely adaptable protective ward.
It seems like as we move across cultures, the concept gets increasingly abstract. Look at India and the Shiva lingam. This seems to be the absolute philosophical peak of this symbol.
Yes, the Shiva lingam represents a total paradigm shift from a literal decoy to a cosmological truth.
How so?
Well, in a Hindu temple, the lingam is placed in the absolute core of the space, a room called the Garbhagriha, which translates to the womb chamber. Visually, it's a smooth, cylindrical stone resting on a base called the yoni.
And the sources point out that early Western scholars, especially those influenced by Sigmund Freud, looked at this and completely misunderstood it, reducing it to just literal sex worship.
Completely missed the mark. And Hindu philosophical texts strongly repudiate that Freudian reductionism.
Right.
In Vedanta and Tantric philosophy, you have to look at the metaphysics. The lingam represents Purusha, which is pure, formless, male divine consciousness.
Okay.
And the yoni represents Prakriti, the primal female matter and physical nature.
So when they are combined in the temple, it doesn't represent human biology at all.
Not at all.
It represents the cosmic boundary itself. It is the eternal spinning cycle of the creation and destruction of the universe. It transcends the physical world entirely.
Wonderfully put.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you look at all these cultures side by side, it's like watching a raw piece of open source computer code get adapted by different developers.
I love that analogy.
Like Thailand takes the raw code and turns it into a decoy program to trick spirits.
Right.
India takes the code and turns it into a cosmic operating system explaining the universe.
Exactly.
But what about cultures that don't want cosmic order? What if a culture values chaos?
Then you get West Africa, and specifically you get Ishu.
Yes. Ishu is the Trester god of the Yoruba religious tradition. He is the master of the crossroads.
The ultimate liminal space.
Yeah, but his imagery isn't about domestic harmony or universal peace.
Not at all. Ishu represents wild, untamed, rule-breaking energy. In Yoruba mythology, he is the absolute gatekeeper. You literally cannot communicate with the other gods without giving an offering to Ishu first at the crossroads.
Wow, he holds all the keys.
He does. He's often depicted with a phallic hairstyle or carrying a carved staff, and it represents his unique ability to inject chaos into perfect order.
To shake things up.
Exactly. He reminds the community that survival isn't just about building a static, safe wall. Sometimes, to survive a rapidly changing world, you need the dynamic, unpredictable energy of the trickster.
We've talked about fighting ghosts, tricking spirits, and organizing the cosmos. But what happens when the threat isn't invisible?
You mean physical threats?
Yeah. What happens when the danger is a physical flood or a mountain collapsing? This brings us to Taiwan, where we see an incredible synthesis of everything we've discussed.
It really is a perfect case study.
Blending indigenous and Han Chinese cultures to fight the violent forces of nature itself.
If you look at Taiwan's geographical reality, with its incredibly steep mountains, frequent typhoons, and torrential river flows, it is a landscape heavily defined by natural threats.
It's a tough environment.
Very.
Yeah.
And we see the human boundary defense psychology map directly onto that physical landscape.
Let's look at the Taokas tribe, an indigenous plains group in Taiwan. They had these sacred phallus-shaped stones, locally known as LP stones or Baogong stones, to protect their land. But as Han Chinese immigrants settled those exact same areas over the centuries, they didn't destroy the indigenous stone.
No, it's a fascinating cultural layering. The spatial boundary shifted ownership from the indigenous tribe to the Han settlers. But the new settlers recognized the power of the sacred object defending that space.
They respected it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So they seamlessly integrated those stones right into their own Han Earth God temples.
Wow.
And today, modern couples actually visit those specific temples to pray to those ancient stones to cure infertility. The function shifted from pure territorial defense back to life-giving energy.
But they also use this against the water, right?
They did.
In Yunlin County, there used to be horrific flooding from the Zuoshui River.
Yeah.
It constantly threatened to wash away the towns. So the villagers erected these massive carved rocks called shigandang stones right at the riverbanks.
Just massive installations.
Yeah, they were using the symbol as a massive spatial suppressor to physically pin down the chaotic energy of the floodwaters.
Pinning down the river itself.
But what really struck me in the notes is what happened when one of these stones broke.
Oh, that speaks to how deeply they believed in the mechanism of this protection. In one community, when a century-old Shigandang stone finally broke apart, the villagers didn't just throw it away.
They didn't just replace it.
No, they performed a ritual to bury the broken pieces deep under a massive banyan tree
Why under a tree?
to ensure its spiritual boundary-protecting power stayed active and intact in the soil while they carved a brand new one to take its place on the surface.
That is incredible. But the most emotionally striking example of all comes from the Sioux tribe, an indigenous group living high in the mountains of Taiwan.
This is a really powerful example.
Their use of this symbol involves something anthropologists call sympathetic magic. Can you explain that concept?
Sympathetic magic is the psychological belief that like produces like.
Okay.
It's the idea that imitating a desired result will magically cause it to happen in reality.
Oh, I see.
So when a devastating landslide occurred in the Sioux hunting grounds, they didn't just see it as a random geological event. In their worldview, the massive landslide was viewed as a literal physical wound in the earth.
The earth itself was hurt.
Yes. The broken, collapsed land was classified as having a feminine damaged attribute.
So to fix this massive geological wound, the landowner or tribal shaman would carve a wooden phallus, they have a specific word for it, hyeza,
Right.
and they would perform a deeply serious ritual to bury it directly into the broken, collapsed soil of the landslide.
It is the ultimate profound application of the life symbol. They're using the masculine, solid, life-creating symbol to physically and spiritually plug the feminine broken gap in the world.
They're healing the earth.
They aren't fighting a monster. They're trying to heal and restore the physical boundary of the earth itself.
So what does this all mean when you visualize the Sioux tribe burying that carved wood in the rubble of a landslide? It just highlights the beautiful practicality of human belief.
It really does.
This is no longer just about warding off an abstract danger in the dark. It's an indigenous psychological tool used to conceptually and community-wise repair a traumatized landscape.
Yeah.
It gives a devastated people a way to take concrete action when the forces of nature feel completely out of their control.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the arc we've traced today is truly astounding.
It is.
We started with chimpanzees screaming and puffing up their hair to defend a tiny patch of jungle.
Right.
We moved to Roman parents hanging wind chimes to distract the evil eye from their babies, Thai merchants seeking protection in chaotic spaces, and Taiwanese tribes healing the very mountains.
It's universal.
It is. The overarching truth is remarkably clear and unified. In a terrifying, unpredictable world where death and disaster can cross our borders at any second, human beings universally summon the purest, most basic symbol of life and creation to build a psychological shield against the void.
It is the ultimate defiant statement. Life is here.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's a lot to process, tracing this single impulse from ancient evolutionary biology all the way to modern mountain temples.
It covers a lot of ground.
But we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Throughout human history, physical borders, the edge of the dark woods, the crossroads, the flooded riverbank where all the danger lived.
Yes.
That for you today, your borders are mostly digital. Your overflowing inboxes, your endless social media feeds, your constant push notifications.
Those are our new frontiers.
Exactly. Those are the modern liminal spaces you navigate every single day. So what are the invisible symbols you are unconsciously putting up to protect your own digital boundaries from the modern evil eye? Next time you feel that creeping anxiety at the edge of your screen, think about what kind of shield you're actually raising. We'll see you next time.